Our scripture for today comes from Ruth chapter 2, the first 4 verses. Let us listen for the word of the Lord. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man in the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I may find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. Lord God, we thank you for your word and for the opportunity to hear today from the story of Ruth. May it remind us of your presence with us, of your providential care for us, and of the challenges that are ahead of us that allow us to draw closer to you. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So this is our second series in Gleanings from Ruth. Our first one was the first chapter of Ruth. I talked about moving on and how difficult that can be for some of us. And moving on can be a hard thing to do. But today's topic is moving forward, which might be even more difficult to do. Taking that next step, making that next choice. Sometimes that can be overwhelming. Making the choice to move on gives us a sense of possibility, but the thought of moving forward, well, that might just stop us in our tracks. In chapter 2, we find Naomi and Ruth moving forward with their new lives. They no longer have the protection or security of having any man in their lives to help them. They're 2 widows, going it alone. And as such, they become reliant upon the kindness of those around them. Ruth is anything but patient. She decides that she has to go out into the fields to glean. Now, gleaning, not the most glamorous of jobs. It involves going around the edges of the field and picking up those items that haven't been harvested by the ones harvesting the field, or picking up the scraps, the leftovers. It was something people without jobs did to help support their families. And in the Old Testament, there are rules and regulations stating how much of the harvest you're supposed to leave behind to glean. It was part of the life of the people of God. Take your harvest, but leave some behind for your fellow man. However, just as in our day, it wasn't practiced as well as it should have been. And often, gleaners found themselves at odds with the landowners or with the workers in the field. Gleaning was potentially very dangerous. Yet Ruth, determined that she and her mother-in-law would not starve, takes the initiative and goes out into a field to glean. I can't even begin to imagine what that experience must have been like for Ruth. I'm entirely too privileged to have firsthand experience about having to glean in the fields. I've had to watch a budget, but I've never had to face the very real possibility of not eating. My mom used to tell stories about going into the fields with her brothers and sisters to help pick the last little bits of cotton that the adults hadn't been able to get. But even that's not quite the same thing as picking grain for your daily bread. But did you know that we have modern day practices of gleaning here in the United States? The Society of St. Andrew, which is a society that the church has been connected with, does amazing work gleaning what's left over from the harvest to feed the hungry and those in need. pounds and pounds of potatoes that aren't harvested, of tomatoes that are turned away from grocery stores, of lettuce that's not perfectly shaped, all going to waste. And they pull it together to feed those who don't have enough. While I haven't had to physically glean, I have had to theologically glean. I've had to hunt around in the scriptures for ways to find that women are included. I've had to root around in worship services to find where my voice or my experiences with God could be shared. I've had to sift through sermons and messages to find the truth that God's love extends to all and calls all into service regardless of our human shortcomings. And in gleaning and searching around the edges and the left behind, I found blessings. Blessings like those found in this beautiful story of Ruth. Ruth is gleaning in a field when Boaz, the owner, comes along. And there's tension in this moment in the story. Will Boaz accept her? Or will he kick her out? She didn't ask permission. But the first words we hear from Boaz's lips, well, they should put us at ease. The Lord bless you. This is how he greets his servants. The Lord bless you. Not, why aren't you working faster? Not, who told you you could stop working? Not, why is this harvest moving so slowly? No, his words to his workers are, the Lord bless you. As someone once said, if you want to know what someone is like, take a good look at how they treat their inferiors, not their equals. These words tell us that Boaz is a man who cares for those who society says are beneath him. His interest goes beyond personal profit. He pays enough attention to greet his workers with blessing, and then to notice a young woman working with them. Now, I've heard teachers say that he notices Ruth because she's cute. For the record, nowhere in the Bible does it say that Ruth is attractive. Her beauty is not what draws her to Boaz. What seems to get his attention is her work ethic. He's been told that she has not stopped working all day after gleaning with the other women. This is apparently unusual, and the servant thinks it's worth pointing out to his master. So Boaz goes, and he goes to Ruth, and he praises her for her hard work. And then he reveals that he does know just a little bit about her story, that she's part of Naomi's family, and that she's giving so much of herself to help care for herself and her mother-in-law. And he promises her protection and security until the harvest is over if she will stick to his fields. And then he goes a step beyond and he invites her to join him and his workers for a meal. This again shows that Boaz is not your typical landowner. He sits and has a meal with his workers. He serves his workers. He gathers up the grain, and then in a beautiful moment, he heaps it in front of Ruth. Heaps. It's an intentional term. It's used to help us see that these aren't scraps he's giving her, not pieces of the bread left over. Rather, Boaz gives her more than enough, an abundance of grain, so much so that she eats her fill and has leftovers to take home to Naomi. This kind of generosity reminds me of the blessings that are heaped upon us by God. We're greeted as valued, even loved members of the family by someone who we are not equal to in any way. God seeks out a relationship, offering us an abundance that we could scarcely dream about. Boaz continues to build their relationship. When after the meal is over, he pulls his young men aside and tells them to make special provisions for Ruth. They're to let her glean among the harvest, not just the edges and the leftovers. They're even told to pull out choice stalks of grain from their sheaves and to drop them so that she can gather them. Boaz doesn't want there to be a chance that Ruth might not have all she and Naomi need. He wants to protect Ruth from the potential dangers in the fields. And while he can't control conditions everywhere, he can make these conditions such that she wouldn't want to seek another place. By doing this, he's building a relationship of trust with Ruth and with Naomi. Trust is one of the most important things we can have, and it's also one of the hardest things to come by. Boaz builds this trust throughout the harvest season. This isn't just one day of kindness, but a lifestyle of kindness, which will lead to a greater trust in Ruth and Boaz's relationship. When Ruth returns home that day, she can't wait to show Naomi her good fortune. She is overjoyed. She has gleaned a bushel of barley. 48 pounds of barley. That's a lot to glean. Naomi is overwhelmed by such a good return on Ruth's time and asks, "My daughter, where have you been?" And Ruth tells her, "I was in Boaz's fields all day." And Naomi declares, "Blessed be the Lord." As it turns out, Boaz is a relative of Naomi's. This man is a kinsman, someone who has been connected to them, someone whom they might rely on. Naomi tells Ruth to continue in his fields, close to his workers, for the rest of the harvest time. There are these times in our lives when we learn of connections that we didn't know or expect. We often call these things coincidences. I like to call them God instances. They're these instances when God makes God's self known in unexpected ways. And this part of Ruth is a biblical example of a God instance. It's that moment when you recognize God moving and cannot wait to see how God will be moving forward with your story. When we're looking forward, we have to look beyond what we can see. Ruth and Naomi had to have the imagination to look beyond their station and look for new ways to care for themselves. Boaz, well, he had to look beyond the everyday expectations of a landowner and develop relationships with the people in his field, including the stranger, Ruth. We too need to look beyond where we are, towards the possibilities God is placing just on the horizon. Where will we go? What will we do? How will we bless others? How will we bless God? Those are questions I ask myself as I try to move forward, and questions I ask us as a church as we look beyond our current circumstances, especially after worship today as we gather together looking for something beautiful out there that God is calling us to be. It's there, I know it. I catch glimpses of it every now and then. But the only way to get there is by moving forward, one step at a time. Let us move forward into God's beautiful tomorrow together, looking forward to God's blessings revealed, day by day, moment by moment, and trusting that our Redeemer loves us and wants the very best.